Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. The division championship Minnesota Twins are looking to go all the way to the World Series in 2024. Bolstered by inspirational shortstop Carlos Correa, a healthy Brian Buxton, and rookie phenom Royce Lewis, plus a pitching staff led by Pablo Lopez and an outstanding bullpen featuring Johan Duran, the Twins are the best bargain in the major leagues, and Target Field is the best venue in baseball. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Welcome to another edition of Access to Democracy. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bill Raker, your host for this edition, and I'm excited to welcome today our guest, Kelly Kappen, who's the nutritionist at the Minnesota Zoo. And I'm really excited to have you here, Kelly, and just delighted that you're able to join us and share some of the things that you do in your role at the zoo.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Well, I want to tell you, it was a few months ago, I read a feature article in one of the local newspapers about you and what you do at the zoo. And I thought, what an intriguing career that you have, and that you would be a really interesting guest to be on our program and to share with our viewers some of the behind-the-scenes things that happens to this very famous and very nice zoo that we have here in Minnesota. So Kelly, tell us a little bit about yourself. What did you do before you became the nutritionist at the zoo, and then after you arrived here, how has your job evolved and what does it involve?
Sure. So I kind of arrived at a zoo nutrition career a bit by accident. As an undergrad, I knew I wanted to do something with animals, but was unaware at that point in time that a zoo nutrition job even existed. And I was going to school at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, started an internship at the Omaha Zoo, working in their nutrition department. So got to learn a lot about animal nutrition there, decided it was a field that I was really interested in and passionate about, and so went on to grad school, got a master's degree in animal nutrition, and then lucked my way back into a job at the Omaha Zoo. I worked there as a nutritionist for about 10 years, and then when I heard that the Minnesota Zoo was looking to add their first nutritionist position ever and to build a nutrition program there, I was really excited for that opportunity to help a zoo develop a brand new program. So.
Well, I'm glad that brought you here.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that you have a master's degree in animal nutrition. I wasn't planning to go there,
Sure.
but because you introduced the topic, I have to ask, what are some of the more interesting courses that you take when you're earning a master's degree in animal nutrition?
I mean, interesting is maybe subjective depending on who you are.
Well, it could be, yes.
Biochemistry of nutrition was very interesting to me, but my master's program was primarily focused on companion animals. So I was studying mostly cats and dogs, and what we call like single stomach monogastric animals. After I started at the Omaha Zoo, there's quite a steep learning curve on the job when you're thrown into a zoo nutrition position that has all sorts of animals. We have primates, so you need to know a little bit about more like a human nutrition aspect. We have ruminant animals, so that would involve like cattle, goats, sheep kind of nutrition. We have birds, we have reptiles, we have fish, so a lot of different species. So while I got kind of some core fundamentals in grad school, learning about some of those basics of animal nutrition, the applied side of things and learning to apply that to the wide variety of species we house in zoos, a lot of that happened on the job. So my coursework maybe wasn't what most people would consider interesting. More the applied side of thing I think people would enjoy.
Well, could you share with us maybe a couple of things that you've learned on the job that have really been helpful and important for you to know?
Yeah, well, I think zoo nutrition is kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different things. So we have to look at the natural history of the animal, so doing a little bit of research about what that animal would eat in the wild, not only what they would eat in the wild, but what is the nutrition composition of what they would eat in the wild. Animals don't have ingredient requirements. Humans don't have like a cheeseburger requirement. We have a protein requirement and a fat requirement. So just knowing that an animal eats fruit in the wild isn't enough to know, with the ingredients available to us here, how do we best replicate the precise type of fruit that they would eat in the wild. So yeah, I think learning a lot about how to go through that troubleshooting process of what does the animal eat, what are some of the ingredients available to us, and how do we best replicate that, and then comparing them to maybe a domestic model. So we have, like I said, maybe the moose at the zoo are a ruminant animal. So moose have been studied to a certain extent, but cattle have been studied far more than moose have been studied because they're very valuable to humans. So what do we know about cow nutrition that we can apply to how best to design the perfect diet for our moose? So it's really more of a process than a clearly defined. There are no clear-cut answers necessarily.
So you call the cattle and the moose ruminant
sure.
Animals.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly does that mean?
So a ruminant animal has a multi-chambered stomach, and the first chamber of that stomach, unlike a human stomach, has a neutral pH. So the human stomach is acidic and can break down food in a certain way. That neutral pH stomach provides a very hospitable environment to bacteria that would live in their gut. So beneficial bacteria that help them break down food. So a human couldn't necessarily eat grass and do much with that other than fill our stomachs. We're not really getting a lot of energy from eating grass or twigs or things like that, but a ruminant animal with that bacterial community can break down that more fibrous material that doesn't have a lot of available protein, doesn't have a lot of available carbohydrate, and then they basically have like a protein farm in their what they call the foregut, so the front of their digestive system. Those bacteria are essentially a protein farm. They digest the bacteria after the bacteria die. So yeah, it's a different digestive structure.
Well, that's interesting for that class of animals. But how many different species and how many different individual animals do you actually have to feed at the zoo?
Yeah, at the Minnesota Zoo, I think we have around 500 different species, about 5,000 different individual animals. But a lot of those animals are maybe group housed. We have like a flock of flamingos. So it really boils down to maybe around 200 individual diet plans, but still a lot.
That is a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
200 diet plans. So of all of the diet plans and the different animals that you have to properly feed, which is the most challenging for you?
I think there are a few that are challenging in different ways. So some things that are challenging, or I can formulate a perfect diet on paper, but if animals refuse to eat it, then I kind of have to throw it out and start from scratch. So dealing with picky animals is one challenge. Our sloths are a good example. They're a species that has, people may not know this, more of a ruminant stomach. So they have a multi-chambered stomach. So they may look kind of like a primate, but we can't feed them too much sugar or starch, or that'll make them really sick. But if they haven't been exposed to a foliage-based diet from a young age, they maybe don't want to eat their green beans and their broccoli. They want to eat their sweet potatoes and their carrots. So
sloths eat more than eucalyptus leaves?
That would be koalas eat eucalyptus leaves, but sloths do eat like a leaf-based diet.
Okay.
They would almost exclusively eat foliage in their natural environment. But sloths housed in zoos and maybe fed more fruits and veggies than leaves sometimes develop preferences for those items. So trying to get them in adulthood then to eat their vegetables as it
Sounds like a teenager.
Yes. Yeah, so getting our
teenager,
picky eaters is definitely a challenge.
Well, I'm sorry I confused the koala with the sloth, but I don't suppose the zoo has any koalas.
No. As a nutritionist, I'm a little relieved because sourcing eucalyptus in Minnesota would be quite the challenge.
Well, it would be. It would be. Yeah. So what are some of the easier animals to attend to from a nutritional standpoint?
Sure. I think carnivores are fairly straightforward. They eat whole animals in their natural environment usually, so as long as we're providing, some people may think of carnivores as just eating muscle meat, but they're also going to be chewing on bones, getting some supplemental minerals that way, and consuming organ meat. So as long as we're feeding a meat-based diet that has appropriate balance of vitamins and minerals, they're going to be pretty easy to take care of. There are some additional benefits to feeding not just like a supplemented ground meat product, but like a whole carcass. The fur and the feathers that they might be consuming in the wild function kind of like fiber does in the human digestive tract. So while they do pretty well on a meat-only diet, having some fibrous material is actually good for them as well. So they're still pretty simple though. Ground meat, supplemented diet, plus a little bit of either some rodents or a chicken or something like that we can feed out whole, keeps them pretty healthy.
So in general, animals have or need like a balanced diet, sort of like humans do.
Sort of like humans.
So is there like a food pyramid that you pick from when you're preparing a dietary plan or a menu?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use a lot of domestic models. So our domestic model that has been very well studied as like an obligate carnivore model would be like a house cat. So we know a lot about the nutrient requirements for domestic cats. So we can apply a lot of that knowledge to other obligate carnivores, not only felids like tigers or leopards, but even to like an obligate carnivore canid model. So gray wolves tend to eat pretty exclusively meat products. So yeah, finding those domestic models, like a moose, we'd look at a cow or a goat. A tiger, we would look at a domestic cat. Our bears, we would look at domestic dogs as more of an omnivorous model. So the food pyramid kind of comes from what we know about their nutrient requirements.
So what are a couple of examples? It's interesting, first of all, that you're able to find domesticated kinds of animals that you can map some dietary information from them onto a more wild animal. Are there some animals in the zoo, some wild animals, that you can't map that easily to, that have a very distinct or unique requirement for feeding?
Yeah, I think while domestic models are a really good starting point, there are a lot of things that we have discovered about some of these species that make them unique. So really the best domestic bird model we have is poultry, and chickens eat grains. They're granivores, and not all of our birds eat grains. So we have maybe an eagle or an owl that is a bird, so has certain amino acid requirements for feather growth, but they're also an obligate carnivore. So we can't feed them like we would a chicken. We've got some combination of chicken and cat nutrient requirements. So we can kind of pull from, that's kind of where I said earlier, it's this troubleshooting process, pulling information from any place that we can and making a best, I don't want to say guess, but sometimes it's a guess, a best guess at what is going to be best for that animal in that moment. Sure.
Well, eagles and owls, I think, are good examples of birds that don't eat like the chickens eat.
Right.
So that's good that you can draw that kind of distinction. Now I want to know, what is the strangest animal with the strangest diet that you work with?
I think one that tickles my brain a little are a lot of people think of primates as being very similar to humans, but
So we're talking monkeys and apes and baboons.
Yeah, exactly. But there are some primates. The example that we have at the Minnesota Zoo would be our black and white colobus that have a ruminant digestive tract. So while they look like a primate, we're going to feed them a lot more like a cow or a goat. So that's a little strange. It's something that we focus a lot on, and we are able to feed them with a lot of like leafy green foliage. So one of the words I throw around a lot in my job is browse. Browse just refers to those fresh leafy branches, and it's a really important feed source for some of those animals. Hay is easy to come by. It's grown a lot around this area. It's easily baled mechanically, stored in barns. Browse we can get. Minnesota has a lot of forests, but harvesting and preserving it gets to be the challenging part. So purchasing it is rather cost prohibitive, and in the winter we have to like have it shipped up from Florida. But so that's one of the things we're focusing a lot on to feed some of those oddball animals that really need a lot of browse in their diet, is harvesting more of that locally and preserving it for winter.
Well, you introduced a topic that I'm anxious to ask about and see if you can share with us. What is the budget for feeding the 5,000 animals at the Minnesota Zoo?
Yeah, right now, I mean, we're experiencing the inflating food costs as much as anyone else is. So right now, our annual budget is around $600,000 to feed all those animals. So they try and eat us out of house and home.
Well, let's hope our viewers will help support the zoo
Yes.
so that you can continue to feed those animals properly. So, us humans, depending upon where we live, we kind of have seasonal diets where we can get and like to eat things in the summertime that maybe we can't get and don't eat in the wintertime. Do any animals have seasonal dietary special requirements or anything?
Yeah. A lot of our animals who live outside have some seasonal just demands on calorie intake. So in the fall leading up to winter, they're going to put on a little extra weight, like humans kind of like to do sometimes, just so they're a little better insulated for winter. And then one of the most dramatic examples at the zoo is probably our bears. Bears go through a period of what's called hyperphagia, or just increased eating. In the fall, they have this strong behavioral drive to put on weight for winter. Because then typically in the wild they would torpor through winter, kind of hibernation light, if you will. They'll still wake up occasionally, they'll eat some food, they'll drink some water, but their activity level is dramatically reduced in the winter. So in order to sustain them through the winter, they need to really bulk up on food. So they have a pretty dramatically seasonal diet where the volume increases maybe 3 or 4-fold in the fall and then cuts way back in the winter, and they kind of sleep all that weight off, as I think a lot of us wish we could.
Yeah, I certainly would like to be able to do that, yeah.
Yeah. So then throughout the winter, they lose all that weight that they put on in the fall. Then when they come out in the spring looking svelte.
Well, Kelly, maybe one thing I'd like to have our viewers understand is that while we're talking about feeding the animals, you don't personally feed the animals, I guess.
Right.
There's another staff, there are other staff people at the zoo who have that charge. Your work goes on more behind the scenes, where you're researching and planning and sourcing, I suppose, the food, the things that the other zoo employees are actually going to feed to the animals. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So our zookeepers are the ones who are taking care of the animals every day, which includes feeding them. And then currently we have all of our zookeepers are also responsible for preparing all those diets that they feed to their animals. And yeah, my role is more that of like a dietitian, to come up with a diet plan that best suits that individual animal, looking at their species, any health issues they have. So animals, just like humans, might have diabetes or kidney disease, things that have specific dietary requirements. So my job is, to to formulate those diets based on specific nutrient targets for those animals, and then to share that information with the keepers so that they can prepare and feed those diets.
So how often would a diet get updated? I mean, are they, other than the seasonal situations that you talked about, a diet for a particular animal is fairly consistent all the time?
In some cases, there are a lot of animals who once we've set a diet for them, it might stay the same for years. But there are some other animals who maybe for whatever reason, the diet that worked for them for a while, their activity level decreases, and now with that diet they're gaining weight. Or their activity level increases, and now with that diet they're losing weight. So there are a lot of just up and down tweaks that happen to keep animals maintaining a healthy body weight. And more dramatic changes wouldn't happen very often unless there was, say, a diagnosed health condition, or maybe a new paper was published that says we've been feeding this animal wrong for decades. Here's some new information that helps you make better informed choices for that species. So that's another part of my role, is keeping an eye on current literature to make sure that we are adapting and feeding the diets that are based on the most current information.
How often do you get a new animal, maybe a new species, that is brought to the zoo, and you have a new mouth to feed? How does that work?
That happens pretty regularly, especially spring and fall are the big shipping seasons when the weather is a little nicer. So in zoos, we might move animals in and out for a lot of reasons. One of those could be based on breeding recommendations. There are species survival plans that make recommendations on which animals should be put in breeding situations to help encourage a healthy, genetically diverse population. So we do have quite a lot of animals moving in and out. Less frequently, we would end up with a brand new species. So when we're sending animals out to another zoo, I will send them with diet information and some context for why we're feeding what we're feeding. And when we're getting new animals in, usually, depending on the institution, they'll also come with diet information of what they've been feeding. That's still a good opportunity for me to reevaluate that diet and make sure that I agree with the choices that were made by the other institution. Or maybe it's another institution that has access to different ingredients than we do, and I can't necessarily source those same ingredients, so I need to kind of reshuffle things to make sure we're meeting similar nutrient targets.
So your work isn't really that static, is it?
No, constantly changing. Every day is a new day. And yeah, besides seasonal changes, we have a lot of in and out and a lot of updates.
Well, you mentioned something that I'd like to explore just a little bit about getting animals in from other zoos. Do zoos trade animals, share animals, borrow animals?
I think all of those things, and that's not necessarily my area of expertise. We have like a registrar who keeps track of a lot of those in and out shipments, and each of the different keeper areas is going to have their own relationships with other zoos. Our curators are kind of in charge of deciding which animals go where and when, and I think in some cases those are loans, in some cases those are purchases, but in most cases it's driven by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. AZA is the accreditation body that oversees the Minnesota Zoo is an accredited zoo. Not all zoos are, but oversees all accredited zoos in the U.S. And there are organizations within that are the ones kind of making recommendations for which animals should move to which areas.
Well, that's really interesting for our viewers to know about that aspect of how our zoo operates, even though it isn't in your wheelhouse, so to speak. How do you keep up with the profession? Is there an organization of zoo nutritionists that you belong to, and you meet annually to have a symposium on information that's developing in your area?
Exactly. So I'm actually on the steering committee for the Nutrition Advisory Group for AZA, and that is a group of zoo nutritionists. We're a rather small community, but yeah, it's a group of zoo nutritionists, and we work pretty hard to share information with each other. And there is a conference every year. One is the Comparative Nutrition Society hosts a conference every other year, and then the Nutrition Advisory Group. So we kind of alternate years with them, and people can present the results of their research and help expand the knowledge of the field.
So, you know, we're wrapping up the last couple of minutes of our program here, and I still have a lot of questions I'd like to ask. We may have to have you back for part 2, Kelly.
Sure.
But is there a need for more zoo nutritionists? And if someone is interested in pursuing the career that you're in, what advice do you have?
Yeah, I mean, personal bias, I think that more zoos should have full-time nutritionists. I think it's a really important field. There are relatively few jobs available in this area, though. So for people wanting to get involved, certainly take nutrition coursework at whatever college you're at, but also try and get some experience at a zoo with a nutritionist, whether that's through an internship or volunteer or shadowing experiences. Really the best way to find out if that career is a good fit for you is trying it and observing it. So.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much. You've been a delightful and an interesting guest. I'm Bill Raker with Kelly Kappen, the nutritionist at the Minnesota Zoo, who's been our guest on Access to Democracy today. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'd like to remind our viewers, if you would like to see more of the interviews of the interesting guests we have on Access to Democracy, go see us on accesstodemocracy.com. And thank you for joining us today. Kelly, good luck with feeding all those animals. Keep them healthy.
Thank you. I'll try.